First of all, thank you everyone for coming. I'm very pleasantly delighted to see so many familiar faces, as well as some new ones join us this evening. To start off, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Dennis Barbaretta, and I'm the president of Order of Omega, as well as the president of Lambda Upsilon Lambda Fraternity Incorporated here on campus.
And I'm Nick Kirby. I'm the vice president of Order of Omega, and I'm a member of Alpha Sigma Phi.
My name is Anthony Montufar. I'm the treasurer. I'm also a member of Sigma Nu.
My name is Chris Bichelli, and my brother at Sigma Phi.
And for those of you that don't know what Order of Omega is, Order of Omega is an honor society devoted to honoring Greeks who excel both academically as well as honors them for their participation in Greek life as well as student activities. With that being said, I would ask you all to help us in giving a warm welcome to Professor Calhoun.
For those of you who haven't been to a last lecture before, we're also going to have a question and answer period afterwards. So if you guys have any questions, just feel free to wait until afterwards. And we're going to have food up top afterwards, Qdoba and Subway. You guys are more than welcome to have that.
How many of you have I had as students? I'm just curious. Let me ask the other one. How many of you have not been in class of mine? So there's only so much implicit blackmail that applies to your attending this lecture. Hope of maybe getting a Wall Street Journal quiz pretty fast. A couple of things before I actually start. One is that I was told I would have a mic, and I don't because it's locked in this room. So Stephen's property is being well tended, but it's not available. I have to kind of speak up and shout. I'm told that the video will capture this if I continue to speak up. The second thing I need to say, though, is that I'm doing something that I never do, which is I've written it all down. And I don't really plan to read it, but I'm not sure I've got it in my head as clearly as I would need to have it to do it without the notes. So I will glance at my notes from time to time. I apologize for that. I don't like people that read speeches, but so be it. There are a lot of things that I want to say, and I want to make sure I don't forget them and hopefully keep myself on track. This is supposed to be a last lecture. Last lectures are, as a rule, hypothetical. What if I were going to die tomorrow, or I were going to retire tomorrow, and I had a chance to give one last transmission to you about life and wisdom and other things that I supposedly have learned. It's an exercise that has become very popular in the academic world. All across the country, professors get up in front of audiences like this and give this last lecture, what they would say under the hypothetical circumstances. The format, though, got famous about 6 years ago when there was a last lecture that was really a last lecture. This is Randy Posh. Maybe some of you know about him. He was a Carnegie Mellon professor of computer science who was scheduled to give a last lecture in 2007. Hypothetically, a what-if last lecture. And story goes, he was having trouble coming up with a title and really getting motivated about this. They needed to print the posters a month ahead of time. They're a little more organized than Stevens is. And a week before the lecture, he got his doctor told him that he had a diagnosis of cancer of the pancreas. And it's terminal, and he had a few months to live. And obviously this transformed the event. He says he nearly canceled the lecture. He felt he should stay home and give attention to his family. He had a wife and 3 small children, but he eventually decided to do it. And in 2007, September 2007, he gave the lecture at Carnegie Mellon, and it was a sensation, as you might imagine. The Wall Street Journal covered it. It was written up in a front-page story at the time. It got transformed into a book. It became a bestseller. I know some of you are familiar with that book. And there's a video of the whole lecture on YouTube you can go and watch if you want. It's very moving because he seems to be in perfect health. In fact, he kind of brags about it. At a certain point, he's doing push-ups in his speech while he's giving his speech. I'm not going to try to do that. And everybody laughs just like you laugh. And there's a feeling of conviviality. And then he shows his x-rays. And he's full of tumors. Metastasized cancer. You can't really see on this very well, but if you look closely at the circled areas, that's the liver. There are white spots in there, those are the tumors. And when you see this, you realize that you're watching a tragedy. He died 9 months later, 47. Well, my case is between those 2 extremes, the hypothetical and the tragic. Obviously, I'm still alive, and no one's telling me I have a terminal prospect in front of me at the moment. But this lecture is not exactly hypothetical, as some of you are aware. I have some of my own x-rays to show you, which I will show you in a few minutes. But first, my conceit. I'm going to talk to you for about 5 minutes now about opera. I've given a lot of thought to the question what life wisdom I might have to pass along. And I do have some thoughts to share, but the first bit of wisdom, as off topic as it might be, is about opera. And I know that most of what I'm going to say now in the next few minutes is going to fall on deaf ears because you're too young. How many of you, the students only, have ever seen a live opera? Well, it's a few. I mean, surprising. I was expecting none. Opera, those of you that haven't seen it, by far the large majority, it's a funny business. It's funny people in funny costumes. They talk foreign languages. They sing in foreign languages instead of talking for the most part. The situations are ridiculous. Someone is a diva or a prima donna, we say. They mean they're over the top, they're touchy, they're demanding. Lots of unpleasant implications. Calling someone a prima donna can be male or female, I suppose. So we have this idea of opera as something that's really out there and alien to our current culture. And I have to say that this was the way I thought about it when I was your age. I'm speaking to the students. And I was in my 30s before I saw my first opera, and I made a terrible mistake. I stumbled into it, and I went to see an opera called The Meistersinger, which was Wagner. The Meistersinger, of course, you don't know, most of you. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest opera in history. It's 6.5 hours in German. I don't know how I survived, but I stumbled into it. So that was my first exposure. It was an ordeal. I didn't become a fan of opera right away. I had to go force myself repeatedly. Sometimes I got dragged to it by other people. It took decades before I finally began to get it. Because opera is difficult. It's long, it's foreign, it was written a long time ago, It's slow moving. One act of an opera is longer than any of the movies that we've seen last year. One act. There's nothing easygoing or friendly about it, user-friendly about it. But here is my wisdom on this point. It will catch up with you, with some of you. Many of you sitting here today as students in the year 2014, I can tell you this, somewhere out there in your far future, 30 years from now, you're not going to remember the other things that I may have said in this talk, but you're going to remember that that guy talked about opera and told you you were going to get to it, or it was going to get to you. And you'll remember it because you're going to be addicted in that time. It's a little like Shakespeare. You need a starting point. They all gave you what? Romeo and Juliet in high school, right? Midsummer Night's Dream, some easy one to get you started on Shakespeare. Well, the question is, what's the starting point for opera? It's the same problem. I once had a friend who told me to try an opera called Salome by Richard Strauss. Salome is a real barn burner. She's the daughter of King Herod in the Bible. She asked for the head of John the Baptist. It's cut off and given to her. She dances a striptease with it. Sometimes they do the production in the nude. It's quite something. But I'm here to tell you the right starting point, the right way to get into opera. When you're ready, start with an opera called Tosca by Puccini. Bear with me. Tosca was written 100 years ago, set in the age of Napoleon, about the year 1800. And it's a story about in Rome. It's a struggle of, it has a political framework, the revolutionaries and the repressive state police. And there's a love story in the middle of it. And Tosca has everything. It has rape. It has murder. Let me get to my, those are some posters of different Toscas. There's the, it has an execution on stage. It has a suicide. And it has, notoriously, a torture scene on stage. Lots of blood. It's practically pornographic. All that happens in the second and the third acts of Tosca. Music is spectacular. I'm telling you, you won't doze off during that. But the real high point of Tosca, the real horror, is the climax of the first act. In that act, the focus is on something that for the audiences in Italy in 1904, when Tosca premiered, was even more terrifying than murder or torture. So, in Act 1, we meet, that's right after Tosca has killed the villain who's tried to rape her. In Acts 2 and 3. We meet the lovers, Cavaradossi, who is an artist, and Tosca, who's a singer. And we meet the villain, Scarpia. Scarpia is a police chief. He's hunting for Cavaradossi because he suspects him of harboring an escaped revolutionary. But there's more to it. He's a sexual monster. He wants to have Tosca for his lust. He's consumed by lust for her. So he wants to eliminate the hero and possess Tosca. And the climax of Act 1 is where Scarpia, he hasn't done any of this yet, but he's revealing his plan to the audience. And the revelation takes place in the church. In fact, this is where Puccini's genius shows out. He overlays the revelation of this monstrous criminal impulse, the villain, with a Catholic Mass, full Mass taking place, with bishops, with the choir, with nuns, with the Pope coming in, trembling, old. And the religious procession grows and grows and fills up the whole stage. There are 100 voices on stage. They're roaring. There's bells sounding. And in the middle of it, there's Tosca Scarpia, Tosca's not there, Scarpia, bellowing out in his lust, his pain, and he finally shouts, I'm going to say the Italian, I'm going to say a couple of languages here so you bear with me. Tosca mi fai dimenticare Dio. Tosca, you make me forget even God. That's the horror of the Act One climax. A sin that was worse than rape or murder for the Italians in 1904. The sin is blasphemy. It's not as much of an impact on our day as it was for them, but the music is spectacular. I wanted to actually now stop and play you about the last 4 minutes of it, but I'm not going to do that. Technical issues, and maybe said a little bit enough about opera anyway. But that's my pitch for that little concept for you to remember. What does all this have to do with my last lecture? Well, I'll tell you. On November 13th of last year, I was in a movie theater on 42nd Street in New York City with my wife watching the digital HD broadcast of Tosca. Broadcasts are fantastic, by the way. If you want a stepping stone into opera, they give you up close facial camera shots and subtitles and all that. And we got to the end of Act One, and it blew me away. So I decided to go get a drink of water after the break. The theater was still dark. They were broadcasting some little interview with one of the stars. And I got up and started towards the exit. And funny enough, here's my first prop. I was holding an apple in my hand. That was my snack that I hadn't eaten yet. The apple probably saved my life, as you'll see. I went down the steps at the side. I turned across. It'd be like crossing in front of this down here. But there was a little extra step, a small step, about this high, that was unlit. And I caught my foot on it, and I twisted and went down. And because I was holding the apple, well, normally you'd put your hands out to break your fall. But I was holding the apple, and somehow you have a tendency to want to clutch that food. I guess that's an evolutionary impulse. See, I never know what's going to get a laugh. That's the other thing about giving speeches. I tell you in passing. Unless you're a real professional comedian, never try to get a laugh. You don't know if it's going to work. Anyhow, I went down hard. I hit the concrete floor on my head. I hit it over my right eye. I didn't black out, but I knew right away that I had suffered a concussion. And it was a struggle. I couldn't sit up right away. I was stunned. It probably sat there for 30 seconds, collecting my wits and the blood coming down. And what's going through my mind at this moment, by the way, is mainly embarrassment. I just felt ridiculous. You know, I was a grown man. I was in a suit, falling in the middle of the theater, with people coming up to ask me if they could help. I didn't really feel like I should have felt at that moment. Anyhow, I got up and went out into the lobby. I collected my wits. There was a fair amount of blood. The theater staff was coming up to ask if I needed help. I waved them off. I went to the restroom. I washed up. And I didn't really feel too much pain. So I sort of thought, well, that's an interesting experience. See what happens to the rest of the movie. I went back. Now, the reason I said the apple saved my life is if I hadn't been carrying the apple, I would have put my arm out when I fell. And I think the doctors tended to agree that it was such a heavy fall, I quite likely would have either broken my arm or broken my wrist. And I would have probably gone to the hospital that night to get that fixed, but I wouldn't have hit my head. And none of the rest of this story would have happened. The next day, I felt more or less okay. I came to Stevens. I had a little swelling over my eye. I taught a couple classes. And in the late afternoon, I was sitting outside my office talking to some students, and I just began to feel a little fuzzy, like unfocused. And I decided to call my doctor, which is not something I would normally do, but I did. And his reaction shocked me. He said, you have to get to the emergency room right away, because possible that what you're experiencing is bleeding in the brain from the concussion, and you need to get a CAT scan. Okay, well, this is going to screw up my evening. I didn't really think it was anything. I was regretting having called him. I know how long it takes to get anything done in the emergency room. So anyhow, I walked 4 blocks to the Hoboken Hospital. I think I put there it is, the emergency room. And I got the CAT scan, and then I went back and sat for an hour waiting for the doctor to come tell me. The doctor comes in and says, well, Mr. Calhoun, the good news is there's no evidence of bleeding or trauma from the concussion. But we see something else. Now, those are not the words you want to hear at that moment. It says there is a mass. I think he was searching for the right word, not to frighten me. Near the pituitary gland. We call it an adenoma. These growths are generally benign. I remember those words. So I'm thinking general. Tell me general. Said you need to go to your doctor tomorrow. You're going to need to consult with an endocrinologist because the pituitary gland is your master endocrine gland. Of course, it drives everything else in your body. And you probably need to consult with a neurosurgeon. Brain surgeon, I'm thinking. Said, well, the operation isn't that difficult. They go up from underneath. I'm not even sure I know what it means yet. Said, yes, it's minimally invasive. The recovery is pretty quick if they think you need surgery. So I'm thinking, oh boy, I know myself. I'm a bit of a hypochondriac. This is gonna mess with my head. I mean, that wasn't an intended pun. This is gonna get in my mind. I mean, what is worse to tell a hypochondriac than you might have a brain tumor? It's a famous scene in one of the Woody Allen movies, Hannah and Her Sisters, where he fantasizes being told about an inoperable brain tumor while he's waiting to hear the results of his x-rays. Anyhow, so I have a brain tumor. That's just about as scary as it gets. And the first thing I have to do is decide who I'm going to tell and how. Got to tell the kids, because one of them was there with me, so he already knows. He's a blabbermouth. Got to tell my wife. That's a lot of fun. The rest of my evening is shot calling and telling people. And I'm doing all the handling and reassuring. I was not inclined to tell anyone else. I was initially not inclined to tell any students in particular because I thought, and several people said, well, you don't want to upset them. But I finally decided that I had to. I realized that it was the right thing to do. And that's another little side piece of advice here. When you have bad news, don't sit on it. It never gets better. I've talked to a lot of people who've had to deal with loved ones who had cancer, and holding back never helps. And then I started going through my medical consultations, and I'm not going to go through all the details of that here, but let me explain a little bit what the medical condition amounts to. The pituitary gland is the master gland of the hormone system in your body. It's right in the middle of your head. If you draw an axis between your ears and between the top of your head and your throat, it's where they meet. And the pituitary, this is a bean from my lunch. That's how big it is. It's less than 1 gram. The tumor, called a macroadenoma, is a very nasty thing. It's generally not malignant, which means it doesn't aggressively spread most of the time. The odds are in your favor. I heard that phrase a bunch of times. What it does do, though, is grow. The pituitary itself is tiny. The adenoma, by the time it shows up in my case, was the size of a bomb inside the back of my head. And what happens as it grows is the line slowly crushes, mechanically crushes, smashes the pituitary. This is my X-ray. And that right there is the tumor. That lighter gray mass. If you don't catch it, there's no room for this expansion, so it slowly crushes. If you don't catch it, what happens is the pituitary gets obliterated over time, and your endocrine functions start to fail, and your kidneys go haywire, and your thyroid goes crazy, and lots of other things go wrong. People go into a slow decline, and nobody knows why. And if and when they discover the tumor, great, but the pituitary is gone. And you have to go on hormone replacement therapy for life, which is a difficult regimen. My tumor had been discovered before any of these symptoms, but it was pretty clear after consultations that it had to come out. One thing led to another, and by the wildest of good luck coincidences, I ended up at Yale New Haven Hospital. The surgeon was a Dr. Dennis Spencer, the head of Yale's neurosurgery department and the former dean of the medical school at Yale. And guess what his specialty is worldwide? #1, pituitary tumors. So I found myself, by good luck, in the best of all places. Now, just to be clear, this tumor sits in the middle of your head, so the way they get at it is through your nose. That's what they meant by underneath. Gives you a general idea. In fact, there are 2 teams of surgeons involved. There's the ear, nose, and throat surgeon that takes you up to the base of the brain. Then he hands off to Spencer, the neurosurgeon, who goes in and takes the tumor out. The operation was about 5.5 hours. And the result, as you can see, was just about perfect. The tumor came out. It was non-adhesive, as they call it. It didn't stick to the pituitary. Sometimes that happens and it tears pieces of the pituitary. It didn't happen. It was a very small incision. In fact, I really had no pain other than taking Tylenol. I didn't have to really take any medication afterwards. They do keep you in the hospital for a few days because when you do this, the pituitary can get angry, as they call it sometimes, and it dumps a lot of hormones in your body that make you go through crazy things for a while, so they want to watch that. But I settled down right away. It was very smooth. I was discharged after 4 days. And I'm basically okay. I have to get an MRI every 3 months for a while, and maybe every 6, and maybe every year. I don't know. But I guess you can call it a complete recovery. So that's my story. But what's the point of this lecture? Is not to tell medical stories. It's to tell you to reflect on what I learned or what I might have learned that I would tell you if this were indeed my last lecture. If that tumor had been malignant or had bad outcomes in other ways. And this was not a simulated experience. I will say that I felt a little bit like I was handed that loaded gun. And the fact that they told me, oh, there's only 1 bullet in the chamber, 5 empty chambers, I still had to pull the trigger. It's still a risk factor. So I had to do a lot of thinking, and I did a lot of thinking. And I'm going to tell you about several of my thoughts, deep thoughts. First thing I'll say, which is kind of abstract, is that we don't really think about death very much in our society, in our civilization. And maybe we don't think about life enough because of that. You know, before the 20th century, it was a rough world. Women died in childbirth, most children didn't live past infancy. People died overnight from diseases. John Donne wrote that famous line, "Send not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." He was writing that to people who woke up every single morning hearing the bell tolling because one of their neighbors or their friends had passed away. We've pushed that all away from us because we have science and we have medicine. So death is not in the ring. It's not sitting here with us. And we're now in a position where we can go 50, 60, 70 years. You're going to go 70, 80, 90 years, however And you won't have to think about it. You'll be under the illusion you can plan your life. I will call it an illusion. You'll be able to plan your life. And that's a good thing. Nothing wrong with that. But it has taken something away. We forget to think about that until we're old. And because we don't, there are some other things that we probably don't confront. I want to tell you 3 of those that I've given some thought to. But I will say first, I'm not going to tell you anything about my priorities changing or gaining perspective or any of that stuff. I'm not going to tell you about how I learned to love my family, because I already love my family and my dog. I'm good with that. But I want to make 3 short points about how my thinking did change. First, I opened the sports page in the New York Times last week, and there was an article about the new Yankee pitcher, Masahiro Tanaka. $155 million, a superstar in Japan. The article was about whether he could succeed in the big leagues in America, because many Japanese pitchers have been very good. They come over here and they don't do very good. And there was a long article about this. And finally, another Japanese pitcher on the Yankees, Hiroki Kuroda, was quoted as giving advice to Tanaka, saying, just be yourself. Trust in yourself. Okay, we know what that means. Then last week, I was at a conference at Goldman Sachs, and they had a speaker named Jennifer McCrae, who wrote this book. She's sort of a fundraising superstar at Harvard. And she's written a book about her exponential fundraising technologies for philanthropic and nonprofit causes. A very impressive one. It's called The Generosity Network. So I opened the book to the introduction, see what it's about. And the very first point, there's the book. Number 1, first, know yourself. And of course, by now I'm remembering Socrates and Plato, who had that as their maxim. Here I need the Greek help. Gnothi safton, know thyself. It was inscribed on the archway going into Delphi, supposedly, and many other places. And you know what? When students come to ask me for advice about jobs and interviews and all that, and some of you probably have done this, I find myself saying that to them all the time. Just be yourself. Don't worry about these other things. Just be yourself. And probably some of you have heard those words from me. Now, what am I talking about? What are all these people talking about? That's what I've started to do. Who needs to be reminded to be themselves? What can it mean, be yourself? Who isn't himself or herself? But we say it, and the student always gets it. We understand that there's some profound point here, so much that the Greeks inscribed it at Delphi, as I said. So let me say what I think. I think another word I use sometimes with people is authenticity. When I'm giving advice to students. I think there's a quirk in our nature that makes it very hard to know ourselves. I've thought an awful lot about this, and I'll give you a very compressed version, so I may not explain it fully. I think in our evolutionary past, as a social animal in a dangerous environment, we had to learn to size up our fellow primates very quickly and accurately. We had to learn who to follow, who to trust. There was survival value in doing this, and we got really good at it. And I think we are able, in fact, to assess 80%, call it, of what anyone is capable of, who they are, very quickly, in a few seconds sometimes, or in a few minutes, just by looking at their face or the way they walk sometimes. Think about it afterwards, whether or not this is true. But that's something that I've seen. You meet someone, how long does it take to form an accurate view of who they are and what they're capable of? Roughly, to the 80%. I think we're programmed to be able to get those insights very quickly. On the other hand, the other guy is sizing you up at the same time, right? And you've got a survival challenge, because if you show that you lack confidence, knowledge, or weak in some way, back in the savannah in Africa 1,000,000 years ago, you would have been cut out of the tribe, maybe. So you have to present a strong face. So there's a game. You try to show your confidence. The other side is trying to figure out what's real and what's not real, and we do this all the time. This is the game of social behavior that we live in every day. But there's a missing piece, I think. This ability that we have to look at someone else and pretty quickly form an opinion of what they're good for, what they're good at, who they are. We can't seem to turn it on ourselves. I think we're blocked from doing it. I think it's actually kind of like an autoimmune response issue in our immune system. There's a blocking that goes on. Why? Because I think if we turn this sizing up skill on ourselves too quickly and too accurately, we'd be spending time focused on our shortcomings, a lot of it. And if we allow those shortcomings, those weaknesses to peer through to the other side, we're doomed back in the savannah 1,000,000 years ago. So we can see what others are up to very well, but we're blocked from seeing who we are. I'm totally serious about it. It's something I thought about for decades, but it's become a little sharper for me now. There used to be a survival value in this autoimmune response of blocking self-knowledge. But we're no longer primates out in the African savannah. So in our modern world, things have changed a little bit. Authenticity is very powerful. An authentic person can have an advantage, because we've come to realize that people who understand themselves better than the next person, who have better self-knowledge than the next person, even if it's not in their own weaknesses, are often more effective. That's why know yourself and be yourself are strong things to say, not trivial things. And that's why they're the first things written over the doorway. And since my operation, I've been trying to keep this thought even more clarified. Something a little bit, some of my blockage seems to have gone away, and I'm happy about that. I'm trying to make sure it doesn't come back. My second observation. When I was in the hospital, I realized that I was weak. I needed help to do things, to do many things, big things, little things. I needed someone to, if I wanted a glass of water, I had to ask somebody to get it for me, because I was all hooked up to tubes and things. I couldn't do it. I'm not used to needing help. I think most of us, most of the time, we do things for ourselves. But the operation and the recovery put me in a helpless position like I hadn't been probably since I was a little child. And you know what? People helped. People were kind. They did things for me that I didn't expect they would do, that I didn't think I deserved. And I thought a lot about that. And here's what I've come to. In our world, we value independence, self-reliance, self-sufficiency. Those are all the virtues we tell each other we should strive to have. And that's all good, mostly. But what it drives out of the system, when everybody is striving to be self-reliant, it takes the room away for, I'm just going to say, kindness. For people being kind to each other in a certain fundamental way that I think you know what I'm talking about. We lose those habits. We become transactional. We do things because there's a transaction involved. I do something in return for you doing something. Nothing crude or wrong about that, but there's no kindness in it. I think all the religions, as I've thought about this, all the great religions, I think, know this. And they build structures in to try to reinforce kindness. In Christianity, there's the concept of alms, almsgiving. It's an old word in English. In Islam, something that I studied as a student, zakat is one of the pillars of Islam. It's a form of charity. It's one of the 5 things you have to do. Philanthropy has become kind of businessified, but kindness is the is where it really should be focused. The kindness has gone out of it a little bit. And I'm guilty of having lost the thread of this. And when I was sick and recovering, I sometimes even felt ashamed at the kindness I was receiving from people that I didn't feel like I had deserved or earned. But deserving and earning is not what kindness generates. Kindness is above that, let's say. So that's my second lesson. Remember kindness. I'm trying to learn how to practice it better. And the good news is, I think, that it's easier than self-knowledge because you're not fighting an evolutionary program. If I'm right about that. My third and last bit of wisdom for you has to do with luck. We all know, whatever science may tell us, that there is something called luck in human affairs. It's a famous story about Napoleon, which I'm going to read to you. Napoleon said, luck is half of everything. Just think about that. Half of everything is just whether or not you're lucky. And the story goes that Napoleon was approached one day by a colonel in his army. And the colonel said, please, my emperor, your majesty, I've been passed over for promotion unfairly. I won that battle last month, but when the honors were handed out, I was out on patrol. I didn't get them. And last year, when I was due for another promotion, my father got sick and I had to go home to help him. And then lightning struck the barn at our farm and burned it down, and I had to help put things in order, and I missed the chance to join your entourage, where I could have won your favor more directly. Please, now, make this right. Give me the promotion to general that I have been unfortunately denied until now. Napoleon turned to his sergeant-at-arms and said, get this man out of my sight. I won't have an unlucky general in my army. Now, statisticians will tell you that the casino always wins. In the market, you can't beat the market, as we know. Science has a hard time dealing with this concept of luck. In fact, a lot of people will tell you very silly things like, oh, you make your own luck. Nothing sillier than that. I've always been lucky. I think about it differently. Consider the story I told you earlier. I fell because I was carrying an apple. I hit my head instead of breaking my arm, which led to the CAT scan, which found the tumor before it could do damage. You know, the last words of the physician in the ER in Hoboken Hospital, Willard, he said, very quiet, commanding as he was sending me home, you know, you were very lucky to have that fall tonight. Just how lucky? About a week later, there was an op-ed piece in the New York Times written by a woman in Silicon Valley. And here's her story, how she gets it. She's writing, this long journey of illness may have started as early as 1978 when I was 13. I spent a summer in intensive care with an unknown disease. The gravity of the illness grew in the 1990s. The tumor, as she had exactly on my head, that shut down my pituitary gland's ability to produce hormones did so insidiously over many years. By my early 20s, it was, I suspect in retrospect, causing misdiagnosis of symptoms that were likely caused by a lack of hormones of various kinds. No diagnosis was found, despite the efforts of many doctors. I was a doctoral student in electrical engineering at an Ivy League school, but I was getting progressively worse. I routinely slept 20 hours a day. I lived with a constant blistering headache, frequent vomiting, and I was periodically wheelchair bound. Large sections of my skin cycled through a rainbow of colors and sores. Half of my face wouldn't move. I drooled. Worse, I felt stupid. I couldn't subtract anymore. I couldn't make a to-do list, let alone accomplish it. Then, in the summer of 1995, my brain tumor was discovered. Diagnosis can often take this long. This might be because of the insidious and chameleon-like nature of the disease. The tumor was not malignant, but it disrupted my pituitary function. The symptoms, well, she's told us. By the way, if it had gone that far with me, I wouldn't have had that kind of operation. I would have had this kind of operation. That's the operation I had. If it had gone to that point, they get as big as the apple, push into all the crevices of the brain cavity. And I don't know if you can tell, but what they're talking about is they have to open up the front of your head and go in and take it out that way. So the fall in the opera movie was my first bit of luck. There were many others. The full story is too long to tell. I went through the eye of the needle more than once in this thing. So what can I say about luck? I think that what we call luck is often about being open to possibilities that are outside of your plan. We make too many plans, I think. We don't listen very well to other people or to the world. And another thing that I find myself telling my students over and over again, I've probably told some of you, when they come and ask for advice, which job they should take, which interview, which internship, all of it, I say, stop thinking so much. Stephen students on the whole overthink it. That's my experience. Better than underthinking. But when you plan too much, try to arrange everything to the last derivative, you miss that little signal. That's luck. That's the luck thing. The most important thing is often exactly the thing that lies outside of the plan. And you have to be ready to hear it and listen to it. Like the knock on the head in the dark movie theater. Last page. So, that's my message. I sharpen my wits on mortality a bit. Authenticity. Be yourself. It's hard. It may take you decades to do it, and I would say a lot of people never get there. Kindness. That's easier. Kindness. And openness to possibilities you didn't plan for, that weren't part of your program. And then perhaps maybe you can make your own. Now let me end with a personal postscript. My children told me that since this is being videotaped, I should realize that they will be watching this, as one of them put it, long after you're dead. A nice thought. But so be it. So let me underscore my luckiness by saying thank you to them. Because of course having children is something else I could have commented on. It's really the most rewarding thing in life that I've ever done. And it's turned out more or less okay. So here's the shout out across whatever it is. Let's say 40 or 50 years you're going to be looking at this, remembering when. So here's the picture. You can tell that's about 10, 12 years ago. The oldest one, standing next to me, is right now a captain in the U.S. Army Rangers, jumping out of airplanes. He's in Afghanistan. Amazing. Margot, my daughter, I'm not allowed to tell you what she does. And the little one, well, I'm afraid he sort of wandered off at some point and we lost track of him. But I'm sure he's doing good somewhere, eking out a living somehow. Anyhow, with that, I will take questions if there are any questions. Thank you very much. It's a lot of fun to do this. As you can tell, I wrote it all out. It's a different experience than what you planned. glad to, thank you to Omega for the invitation. It's a lot of fun. Are there any questions? Yes.
Looking at luck, rather than like having you be lucky that you are holding an apple, could you think of it, did you ever think about it being maybe bigger in that the reason why the apple saved your life was because you still have yet to affect so many of the students? Is it you're continuing to like have an impact in our lives?
Well, you're very kind to say that. I think luck is a very challenging topic to think about. I've thought about it a long, long time because it is true. I've been very lucky in my life in ways that made no sense to me then or now. And yes, it's mixed up with elements of religious thinking. It's mixed up with elements of a sense of fate, meant to be qualities. And I'm not going to pretend that I have a full theory of the thing. All I'm saying is that I do think a big part of it is you should try to stay open to that event or voice or phenomenon that takes place outside of what you were planning to do that day. Don't just regard it as noise to be filtered out. Sometimes that's the thing that gives you a decisive piece of information, decisive signal about what you should do. And sometimes it saves you know, yes.
Were you afraid going through the whole medical process, and did that like make you want to think differently?
It's another thing I thought a lot about because I thought when I first heard the words, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be, puddled for the next 2 months while we figure this all out. But the scene in The Godfather, if I may, on the hospital steps, where Michael is gone, his father is shot, and the guys are going to come to kill the old man, and he has to kind of tough it out, bluff them that he gets the guy, the flower guy, to come and stand with him on the steps. And they do it and they bluff, they carry off the bluff, and afterwards the flower guy, is trying to light a cigarette, he can't even strike a match, his hands are shaking so much. And Michael, this is before Michael becomes a gangster really, he reaches over and helps him light the cigarette, and then he looks at his hands and they're not shaking. And I think he sort of says, how about that? That's kind of the feeling I have about my own reaction to all this. As it happens, no, I didn't really, other than about one day where I had a little bit of a bad day, I didn't really have a lot of fearfulness about this whole thing. And I don't know why. I have no idea why. It's not something that I would have predicted about my age. Yes?
Is there anything that you do or have done throughout the years in particular that helps you when you're reflecting, kind of piece things together and come up with these realizations?
That's a good question. I guess I would only say that a lot of people, there's a tendency I think that we have to want to settle things in our mind. So we figure something out and that's it. Okay, I know what that's about. That's how that works. And we settle it and put it on the shelf and it's behind us. And that, that's a productive thing to do in a lot of situations. But I think when it comes to important issues related to your life and your mortality and how you react to challenges and that kind of thing, I think retaining the ability to keep those issues open for revisiting is maybe the best answer I can come up with on the spot for you. That don't lock them away. You put them away as tentative conclusions, but be prepared to revisit things and reassess. I don't know, it sounds weak to me, but that's my best answer off the top of my head. Yes?
What would you say is the most exciting thing you've ever done?
nothing pops directly into my head. There's a bunch of answers coming from business success events. So, you know, I could recite to you various things that I consider to have been successful moments in my business career where I said, yeah, we really nailed that. We got that. You know, we raised that public offering, raised that money, or that turned the key on a new invention, and it really worked. I will say, maybe in that context, I've been on the witness stand a few times in my life, and I did well, and that was a lot of fun. Not in criminal cases, by the way. These were patent cases. Nothing, and I was not being accused of anything. I was a fact witness. Anyhow, I feel like that's a feeble answer, but I'll have to let it stand. So I know there's, yes?
When did you decide, like, what made you want to be a teacher, having like the success you had in business?
That's a good question, because some of you may get to that point. And what I would say is I see a lot of people in business who strive to get to a successful level, and they get there, and they don't really know what comes after that except more striving. So they make, $1 million, they want to make 10. They make 10, they want to make 100. They want to make 100, they want to make $1 billion. And there's a disease aspect of that in people that I've known. I think it's important to recognize, as I said, you're all going to have long lives, God willing, right? You're going to live 70, 80, 90 years. You're so young now, you're going to have a chance to have more than one career. That's one of the blessings of America. So in my case, I had done a lot of things and run all over the world and had a lot of successes in various ways. But I got to the point where I realized if I continued doing that, it was going to prevent me from doing a lot of other things that I wanted to do. Particularly write. That was my mindset at that time. I wanted to write. Now I came here and I haven't been able to write. I learned the teaching game, and I have fun with that, and it's very rewarding. So, luck. Again, not part of the plan, but it was lucky for me that it was there. Yes?
What do you want to write about?
I have at least, they will testify, at least 10 book projects in my head. At least. I mean, some of them are small and focused. They have to do with topics in finance. Some of them are broader, topics in history of technology. One of the books I really had planned to write, which is a big book, has to do with the history of the telecommunications technology in the industry and telecommunications. So there's a lot of them there. And I'm hoping to somehow get enough discipline, self-discipline in my daily pattern to be able to create the space to do that.
All right, if there's no more questions, could we have one more hand to Professor Calhoun?
Just one more thing. It happens that April 9th is one of those days in my life. It's my wife's birthday, and I have for young William a little